First, I am guessing that toxic behavior and patterns has already cost you something significant. I mean, maybe you trusted in someone in leadership, ended up being a disaster, or you had some small groups go rogue, or you've got factions and divisions in your church that simply aren't healthy. So if you allow toxic behavior to continue, it's going to cost you, and it probably already has cost you. That's the kind of thing that, honestly, for me, it makes me lose sleep, and it makes you question how much longer you can do this, and it makes leadership so much harder than it needs to be. So the question becomes, what do you do about it? I want to go deep with you. Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. I'm so glad to have you join us. And hey, we are continuing with an experimental format on the podcast. It's a solo episode, just me, no guests. I'm going to be talking directly to you. And these episodes, these solo ones, are going to be shorter than most, under 30 minutes, sometimes even a little bit shorter than that. And as usual, I hope it helps you thrive in life and leadership. So today, I'm going to be talking about toxic people. I want to help you spot a toxic person, and I want to help you figure out how to eliminate their impact on your mission. I mean, there are obvious signs that somebody is toxic, but after decades in leadership, particularly in church leadership, I think there are more subtle signs. And in the early days, I missed them, and it cost us a lot. And you know this. I mean, if you end up with toxicity in your church or business, it can be a real challenge to eliminate it. And then on top of that, you got to recover from it. It's a mess, okay? So we're going to dive into the content in just a second. As usual, there are show notes for this. You can get them at careynieuwhof.com/episode 658 or in the description of your podcast player. So anything I talk about, you can get the links there. And I'm also going to be talking about team dynamics, staff and volunteers alike. So I want to share two other resources that are going to help you dive deeper into the subject. So first of all, I've got a free guide that will help you have better one-on-one meetings. This is so critical, okay? Toxicity can start anywhere. It can start with your one-on-ones. In this free one-on-one guide, I outline 5 simple questions that every leader asks in their meetings with staff. You should ask these questions. Just click the link in the description of this episode wherever you're listening. Your one-on-ones are going to go a lot better. They're probably going to get a lot healthier. Second, you can get my comprehensive training on this in my course, The Art of Team Leadership. So thousands of leaders have used this course to grow their leadership. And in the process, they learned how to lead better, how to manage, how to motivate. I've got a couple of units on culture and creating a healthy culture. Again, click the link in the description or visit theartofteamleadershipcourse.com. Now, this episode is also brought to you by CHURCH.TECH. So when I say AI and ministry, what comes to mind? Like, how does it make you feel? So I know that in today's world of ministry, AI is a hot topic. Here's where I've landed. AI, when used ethically, can help you take your ministry further and free up your time to pastor your staff and congregation. The key is to find a trusted partner and a trusted solution. For me, and for hundreds of other churches, that solution has become CHURCH.TECH. With over 85 years of combined ministry experience, CHURCH.TECH helps pastors reconnect with their communities by handling the tech side. They prioritize ethical use of AI while they offer tools to reduce the time it takes to do everyday ministry tasks. So with CHURCH.TECH, you can quickly turn your weekly sermon into small group study guides, complete with discussion questions, summaries, and engagement analytics. You can do sermon clips for social media and a whole lot more. Yeah, you may want to edit them, but it's so much easier to edit than it is to start from scratch. So if you want your church to really start to capitalize on AI ethically, visit CHURCH.TECH. And if you use the code CAREY, C-A-R-E-Y, at checkout, you'll get an exclusive 25% discount off your first 3 months. So just head on over to CHURCH.TECH, use the coupon code CAREY, and now let's dive into toxicity on the podcast. So many leaders I talk to, I mean, I get so many questions. It's all about, I got this toxic team member, I got this toxic elder, or we've got people in our church who are just causing damage. Now, you see this in your churches, you see it in your companies, you see it in culture, online, on your team. You see it in your boss. I mean, I get it. It's a big issue these days. So here's a metaphor that might be helpful. So I've seen it in our church as well. And when our church was growing rapidly, when I wasn't as strict on finding and dealing with toxic behavior, it felt like there were little pockets of toxicity that would move around randomly in our church. Like there was gossip over here and then infighting. And then it sounded like there was some kind of toxic like pinball game being played. Sometimes unhealthy people would just bounce off one corner and then ricochet off another. And it was moving so fast, I felt like I was playing, like I couldn't keep up. I couldn't see the pattern. So what happened when I got tired of seeing that is I got better at spotting and learning how to eliminate toxic behavior in our church. And guess what? Things got a lot better. Now, I realize some of you will be wondering, why am I talking about toxicity when I'm a Christian? After all, what about grace? Like, isn't the church a hospital for sinners? None of us is healthy, so it's inevitable, right? Well, a couple of thoughts. First, I am guessing that toxic behavior and patterns has already cost you something significant. I mean, maybe you trusted in someone in leadership, ended up being a disaster, or you had some small groups go rogue, or you've got factions and divisions in your church that simply aren't healthy. So if you allow toxic behavior to continue, it's going to cost you, and it probably already has cost you. That's the kind of thing that honestly, for me, it makes me lose sleep, and it makes you question how much longer you can do this, and it makes leadership so much harder than it needs to be. So the question becomes, what do you do about it? I want to go deep with you. So first thing you should do, take a good look in the mirror. All right. Before we get into looking at the behaviors and patterns of other people, take a look in the mirror. I've been in senior leadership for almost 3 decades, and as much as I don't want to admit it, it's still true. My organization will only ever be as healthy as I am, and I have had healthy seasons and not healthy seasons. Now, the same principle is true for you. You can fight toxicity all you want, but your organization will only ever be as healthy as you are as the leader. And you're saying, well, I'm not the senior leader. Okay, even if you're not the senior leader, your health determines the health of the team you lead, the department you run, or the crew you manage. The health of the leader determines the health of the team. And if you don't have a healthy organization, it's probably because you don't have a healthy leader. Healthy leaders produce healthy teams. Unhealthy leaders produce unhealthy teams. So as you listen to this podcast, if any of these behaviors or signs I'm going to go through sound a little bit too close to home, maybe your call to action is to get some help to get healthy. A counselor and some good friends can be instrumental in that. And there are obvious signs of toxicity we'll go into. I won't spend a ton of time on them, but there are also, as I hinted at the beginning, some subtle signs. And I want to spend time on the subtle signs because they're easy to miss. So, I mean, if you're looking at the obvious signs of toxic behavior, you're going to look at self-absorption, lying, manipulation, an unwillingness to listen to feedback, people who assign blame, people who refuse to accept responsibility, people who say they're never wrong, people who play the victim, or you get frequent outbursts of anger, hidden agendas, critical spirit about anything they didn't think of or don't like, gossip or malicious talk, ignoring boundaries, passive-aggressive behavior, pursuing a different mission than the organization's mission. I mean, those are all pretty obvious signs of toxic behavior. And if you see any of those signs present, it's wise to refrain from trusting someone in senior leadership or in leadership at all. But there are more subtle signs as well. And I want to review 6 that most leaders miss. So in addition to everything we talked about already, here's the first sign. Number 1, they come on too strong. In my experience as a leader, the people who show up and want to make it headline news that they've arrived are rarely, and I'm being generous here, healthy people. Right? When they come in and it's like, man, you are so fortunate to have me here. They just come on too strong, right? What's perplexing is that the people who end up being the most toxic at the end of the relationship are usually the people who are over the top positive when they first meet you. They come on and they tell you, like, this is the best church ever. And I have learned to be suspicious when people on their first visit say, that's the best message I've ever heard in my life, or this is the best church I've ever been to, or you're the best leader. I mean, that's their first visit and they've taken the time to talk to you and this is what they're telling you. Now, as much as my little fragile ego would love to believe what they're saying, I usually find that if they're over the top positive at the beginning, they become over the top negative at the end. Now, what I'm looking for For healthy behavior, people who are moderately impressed or even neutral on their first visit and then gradually warm up tend to be the healthier people in the long run. And know this, people who come on strong when they first meet you usually leave just as loudly. So a loud or over-the-top first meeting or first impression usually signals that something's a little bit off. It's not always fatal, but be wary. So that's the first sign. Second sign, and these are subtle, okay? So you just gotta, they're not always the signs that you're looking for, but when I've seen these and more than one is present, my antennae go up. So the second sign is when people give you advice during your first meeting. So whether that meeting is a casual conversation over coffee, a conversation in the hallway, or even a job interview where you're interviewing someone for the job, people who tell you 15 ways you can improve your organization or your public speaking often end up being toxic people. I was talking to a leader recently. He had this exact scenario. The person was completely qualified for something they wanted to do, but he was already criticizing the organization in the first interview. I mean, this is not good, folks. This is not good, okay? Are there any ways you can improve your organization? Well, of course. Can I improve my public speaking? Yes, I can. But when someone leads off with loads of advice, well, that isn't healthy. I mean, think about it. If you're going to meet a hero of yours and you're like, man, I loved all your sermons, I've listened to them, but 3 things you could do to be a better preacher include 1, 2, 3. I mean, that's not healthy, right? So what it shows when people give you advice on the first meeting is that they lack humility, or they might be low in self-awareness, or they don't have a particularly high EQ. When people I first meet start telling me about all the ways that we can improve our church, I thank them and I tell them point blankly, we might not be the church for them. And then sometimes I offer to help them find a new one. It's just a sign. At a bare minimum, I do not put them into leadership. Okay, third subtle sign. The relationship isn't reciprocal. So in a healthy human relationship, there's mutuality and there's reciprocity. In unhealthy relationships, one person will tend to dominate. So this can show up in a couple of ways. First of all, it happens when the other person just dominates. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, noticed, and they really monopolize the conversation. There's no give and take. A second way this expresses is the opposite. Perhaps you have to do all the initiating. You have to do all the discussion. You have to do the follow-up. They're just too reserved. See? Healthy relationships are mutual. There's a back and forth, and in the end, it's almost an equal exchange. Now, the danger here for leaders is that you probably won't end up putting a person who's too quiet or withdrawn into leadership, but you might put the outspoken, talks a lot, dominant person into leadership. And that can be a mistake, because if they don't give air time to anybody else, they're not going to be an effective leader. What you're looking for is reciprocity. If you don't see that, beware. Okay. The fourth characteristic is a little bit like it, but I think it deserves its own focus, and that is they want to be the center of attention. Watch for people who hijack conversations, who never ask questions, who think they're experts, who want to get involved too soon, who everything is about them. Those people often want to tell you what they think they're an expert in. They tell you what they think about everything. They tell you about their amazing track record. They talk about their accomplishments. They demand your attention. And you know what? There's something luring about that. It kind of lures you in because you're like, wow, these people are spectacular. They're great. And maybe it's true. Maybe they have all of these accomplishments. Let's give them benefit of the doubt. And let's just say that there isn't a lot of hyperbole in what they're saying. But you know what I've noticed? Truly healthy people who have significant accomplishments wait to be asked. They wait to be asked. So if somebody has spent the first 10 minutes telling you how awesome they are, they might not be that awesome. All right, point number 5. You hear from them far too often in the first 30 days. So often a toxic person, because they like being the center of attention, will try to get on your calendar soon. They'll email you, they'll call you, they'll ask for breakfast. They'll act like you are their best friend as they're still getting to know you. And they're going to try to figure out how they can help or be influential early on. Now that can seem like a fantastic thing. After all, you're dying for someone to own the mission and take initiative. And again, though, the truly great leaders will wait to be asked. They have a lot of other things going on. They're busy. They respect you. So often the amazing leaders, they're more reciprocal. They're not as dominant, and they wait to be asked. They have the humility to be obscure for a little while. These are the great leaders, and serve rather than want to be served. All right. Another sign to look for, and this is the final one I want to share with you. They have a track record of moving around. So usually a person who comes on strong has a history of moving around. So they'll be like, man, this is the best church ever. You're the best preacher ever. Now, what they've done is they've said that to 5 different preachers over the past 10 years. And when I'm picking up some of the other signs, I'll ask a question such as, tell me where you've gone to church over the last few years. And then it'll be like, well, I tried church X and it wasn't this. And I tried church Y and it wasn't this. And often they'll tell me about 3 or 4 different churches they've been to, major flag, or about a schism that they were part of that caused them to leave their last church. That's a big flag. And when that happens, here's the hint. If somebody has left 5 churches in the last 5 years, they're probably going to leave yours too. So what do? Well, I had a leader who exhibited a few of these signs, and he had been the chair of the board at another church that had just undergone a split, came on strong. And I said to him, hey, really glad to meet you. I've heard a lot about you. Really glad you're here. Here's what I'd love for you to do. I'd love you to sit in the back row and observe our church for 6 months. And after 6 months, tell me what you found. Now, that was a little bit of a test. And it was a test because I wanted to know whether he had the ability to be a follower, not just a leader. You know what? He passed that test with flying colors. He went on to serve in leadership, to become an elder, to become a great friend. And he said to me at one point after, he said, when you benched me for 6 months, I was so mad. But he said it was exactly what I needed, because he said I had just come out of a really volatile situation. I was charged up. And he said, I needed 6 months just to recalibrate. So what that tells me in a case like my friend that I just described is he had the humility to wait. He had the capacity to become a very healthy leader in him. If someone is truly toxic, they won't do that. So I want to recap the 6 signs, and then I want to talk about what do you do about all of this. So again, these are like similar, but different enough that they deserve their own points. And if you've got a cluster of them, watch out. So sign 1, they come on too strong. Number 2, they give you advice during your first meeting. Number 3, the relationship is not reciprocal. Number 4, they want to be the center of attention. Number 5, you hear from them far too often. Number 6, they have a track record of moving around. If you've got a few of those, you're probably dealing with someone who isn't healthy. So now that you know the signs, the subtle signs, what do you do with all of that? Well, I want to borrow heavily from Henry Cloud here, but I need you to understand, and this is what I had to figure out, there are basically 3 kinds of people. It probably seems too simple to divide the world into 3 kinds of people, but try as you might to avoid it. Clinical psychologist, best-selling author Henry Cloud helpfully points this out in his book, Necessary Endings, and he says, I resist this, but at the end of the day, there's 3 kinds of people in life and leadership. There are wise people, foolish people, and evil people. I'll say that one more time. Wise, foolish, and evil. So essentially, the difference between wise people and foolish people comes down to how they deal with the truth. So when you're dealing with wise and foolish, wise people encounter the truth. They're like, oh, if I do that, it bothers people. And they change as a result. They're like, I can't do that anymore. Or, hey, if I spend too much money, I end up in debt. I can't spend that much money, or I need to go make more money. In other words, they see the truth and it changes them. So, you can use a million examples. After getting a speeding ticket, wise people learn and they slow down. Now, foolish people do the opposite. They encounter truth, but they don't change. They expect reality to change. They get a speeding ticket. They're like, well, that was dumb. And they got a million excuses and they go on speeding and they get another one. They spend too much money and eventually they go bankrupt. Confronted with a problem, a foolish person will deny, blame, minimize, generate excuses, and really do anything in his or her power to avoid having to come to terms with reality. They don't learn and they rarely grow. As Cloud's frequent collaborator John Townsend puts it, foolish people have a flat learning curve. Man, I love that phrase. And as a result, they tend to wreak a lot of havoc and they cause damage to their own lives and the lives of others. Now, they don't mean to hurt anybody. They just never really learn. And as a result, they're foolish. Now, the third kind of person, as hard as it is to admit, are evil people. And here's the difference. Evil people intend to harm you. They want to take you down. As hard as it is to believe, they do not have your best interests at heart. They want to see you and your mission fail. Now, I found this really hard to accept early on in leadership, but I've seen it enough times to agree with Henry Cloud and no longer dismiss it. So what do you do with this stark and unpleasant truth? Second thing, and this one's hard, you just have to realize some people are not going to change. At some point in our lives, we all have a mixture of that behavior in us. You know, sometimes we're wise, sometimes we're foolish. Once in a while, we do an evil thing. And I know I've spoken words that I intended to hurt people. And when I do that, I'm acting in an evil or toxic way. But hopefully I realize, okay, I can't do that. I need to repent. I need to apologize. I need to make that good. When I have foolish behavior, hopefully I learn. It's like, all right, that isn't going to change, so I need to change. People who are wise are people who learn from their mistakes and change. Now, the good news with Cloud's categories of wise, foolish, and evil people is that some people do change with time and they'll grow. Evil people may have a change of heart and start helping, not hurting, and that's amazing. I mean, that can happen. Foolish people, they can see the light of day and change. But overall, most of us would have to admit that some human beings fall into one of those three categories at most moments in life. You're either generally a wise person, you're generally a foolish person, or some people, they really are evil. They intend to harm. And that means as much as you want to believe otherwise, despite your coaching and encouragement, fools sometimes remain fools and evil people remain committed to harming others. And I know that sounds so depressing and judgmental and terrible, but if you want to protect your organization, you got to be able to handle that. Henry Cloud puts it this way. He says, if you are responsible, this is a direct quote, if you are a responsible and loving person, then you might assume that other people are like you, responsible and loving. They do the right thing, taking responsibility for themselves, for their mistakes, for their work, and they care about other people and how those actions affect people. So doesn't it make sense that everybody would be like you and really care? And then he says, yeah, sure, if you live on Mars, but this is planet Earth. And if you're going to succeed in life and in business, you need to succeed on this planet, not on Mars. In other words, there are wise people, foolish people, and evil people. So now, this is where your leadership and discernment comes in. You've spotted toxic behavior. You know what foolish behavior is. What do? You limit fools. Okay, that's step one. And this is the problem with foolish people at work. You only have so many hours in the day and you only have so much energy. The problem, if you have fools around either on your team or in key volunteer positions, when you pour your time and energy into foolish leaders who never change, after all of your coaching and all of your help, they're no better and you're drained. What's worse is their repeated mistakes impact everybody around them and they threaten the organization. Does that mean you'll have no fools at work? Well, no. There's an abundance of foolish people and behaviors, and I'm not sure that you should eliminate all fools from your life. You could have a little place for people who need some help, but you don't want them on your senior team. I mean, the person who's perpetually late frustrates everybody. The person who never takes responsibility frustrates everybody. What it does mean is because your time is limited, you should limit your time with foolish people and be really careful about who you hire, who you recruit, and who you allow into leadership, volunteer or paid staff. The key to handling foolish behavior so it doesn't impact your mission is to limit the number of foolish people in leadership. Hopefully it gets down to zero, and limit their impact. Otherwise, the cost is simply too great. Whether they mean to do damage or not, foolish people can do a lot of damage. And it's hard to build the future on people who can't even navigate the present. Okay, so that's foolish people. What about evil people? Well, when it comes to evil people, people who want to wound and maim or undo your organization, I agree with Henry Cloud. There's only one option: block them. Get away and stay away. Looking back on my leadership, because I tend to be very trusting, I realized there were seasons, for whatever reason, where people wanted to take me out or take down our mission. Hasn't happened a lot, but it has happened. And sometimes I was too generous with those people. I thought, well, maybe they don't mean that, or maybe they want to change, or maybe I can just do something differently. And you know what? It didn't work out well at all. So what you need: clear boundaries, firm decisions, and consistent no's that block any attempt they make to undermine the mission. Those are critical. So when it gets that serious, I always involve other leaders I trust to make sure that we're really dealing with someone who intends to harm, that I'm not misdiagnosing, and that the boundaries that we put in place make sense. On rare occasions, and believe it or not, this has happened a couple of times, those boundaries have had to include the police. People were just out to harm us, and we had to involve the authorities. So my faith tells me to love my enemies, but there are some instances where a person is best prayed for from a distance, not up close. So, imagine reaching 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 new people in the next year if your mission continues. That's what the people who want to harm you threaten. That's what they're taking down. So taking the mission seriously means that as a leader, you also have to take evil seriously. It's actually that important. So we've dealt with foolish people, with evil people. What do you do with wise people? And the answer to that is beautiful, my favorite. Stack the top of your organization with wise people. You know how to get the healthiest team and how to get the best team possible to move the mission forward? Stack the top of your organization, that's a volunteer and staff, elders, board, with as many wise people as you can find. This doesn't mean they all agree with you. All right, these are just wise people who make great choices, who see the truth and correct themselves rather than expecting the truth to change. By stacking the top, I mean your senior leaders, your board, and other key players. You want to look for honest, humble, growing leaders who love to learn, who are open to feedback, and who are wise. Teachability is a much greater ingredient in wisdom than IQ is. A humble, hungry, teachable leader will be a smarter leader any day. And surprisingly, there are a lot of people out there. You just got to look for them. And again, remember, they're reluctant sometimes to step forward. So obviously, there's a lot of work to do based on the points we've already covered and the regular vigilance that you need to maintain in keeping threats at bay. But the secret is that once you do the work we've talked about so far in this pod and stack the top of your organization with wise people, a natural buffer against toxic behavior gets created. Eventually, a multiplicity of wise leaders will help you create a healthy culture. Because here's what's true about culture, all right? Create a healthy, deep culture, and over time, toxic people leave. Why? Because a healthy culture spits out toxic people. Just like a healthy body wards off disease, healthy cultures ward off toxic people. They can't get a toehold. And this is the beautiful surprise. Nobody gets kicked out. When your culture gets ultra healthy over time, toxic people leave because they realize, I can't get traction here. I have no validation. I'm going to go somewhere else. So your long-term investment and vigilance finally pay off in ways you never expected. So if you want a healthy organization, here's what you do. You limit foolish people, eliminate evil people, and stack your organization with wise people in leadership. Hey, I hope this episode has been helpful. I'd love your feedback on social or shoot us a note at Carey@CareyNieuwhof.com. So you now have some real practical steps you can use to really make your organization healthy. The question becomes, well, is there anything else I can do? Well, I want to invite you to consider the Art of Team Leadership. It's my course where you get my comprehensive training in this area. We're just dipping a toe into it in this podcast. By the end of doing the Art of Team Leadership, you'll know exactly how to create a pipeline of people who execute on goals, have strategies for motivating your team, and who learn how to develop leaders that give your mission the focus and care it deserves. Way too many pastors burn out, not because they're not called to ministry or they work too hard, but because they don't have the right team that can execute. But you can change that. You deserve a strategy and a system that will attract, keep, and develop the best leaders you can find. And that's exactly what you'll find in The Art of Team Leadership. If you want to learn more and register today, go to theartofteamleadership.com. Again, that's theartofteamleadership.com. Don't forget about using my code Carey at CHURCH.TECH. If you're ready to spend more time making disciples and less time stuck behind a screen, go to CHURCH.TECH and use the code Carey at checkout for an exclusive 25% discount off your first 3 months. So next episode, we are back to our regularly scheduled programming. I've got interviews with Priscilla Schreier, Rich Velotis, Mark Sayers, Charles Duhigg, Andy Stanley, N.T. Wright, Lisa Turkhurst, and Tim Ross. Coming up, man, I'm so excited for that. And thank you so much for listening. I hope today's episode has helped you identify and break a growth barrier you're facing. And give us feedback on the format. Let us know what you think. Carey at CareyNieuwhof.com or hit me up on the socials. We'll catch you next time.